All right, we're gonna call this meeting to order, please. And we'll start, if we could, with introducing the council members so those folks who are online know who is here. Marjorie, are you willing to start the introductions?
Marjorie Christensen.
And Steve Hill from Command Condon.
Good afternoon, Seth Makepeace with the Sales Trinity Tribes.
Mike Pathausen from Butte.
Katie Garson Forba, DEQ Bureau Chief.
Mick Ringshot from Butte.
Christy Deal from Missoula.
Doug Martin from the Natural Resource Damage Program. And I believe we have Bill Shea with Fish, Wildlife and Parks online.
Yes,
Yeah, Billy from Phillipsburg and Valerie from BNRC are on.
Hello, Bill Schenk here. I can hear you okay. Thank you, Doug.
All right. With that, we'll get started with the financial updates. Doug will get us going.
I will kick it off here. Today is an informational meeting for the advisory council, where we're going to go over our annual financial report and then an update on the aquatic and terrestrial and recreation projects that we've completed work on over the year, as well as an update on the Parrot project, which this council has had a major role in the funding of approximately half of that project. Just to remind everybody, this is a hybrid meeting. We do have a number of people online, and the meeting is being recorded. So we do ask all AC members and members of the public, if you do talk first, once you get recognized by Christy, that you announce your name each time you talk so that we know who is speaking. Just a quick overview of the agenda. We're gonna start with the financial report. Miranda will give us that, and Brian and Nathan will go over the aquatics report. We'll have a short break, and then Ray Vinkey will go over the terrestrial and recreation projects that we worked on. Jim Ford will give an update of the Parrot project, and then I will give you a short 10-minute update of where we are on the revision that we talked about at the last meeting, and then we will adjourn hopefully by 3:30. We will definitely not be adjourning at 7 o'clock. So to keep that moving, I will turn it over to Miranda.
Ready? My name's Miranda. I'm the administrative specialist for NIDP and I work on the budget. So in your packet, you were provided a sheet that had some explanations of some of the stuff that we are looking at today and sort of how we get to some of these numbers. I'm not going to go through all of this on these slides. If you do have questions, let me know. I'm happy to answer your questions, but I didn't want to take up a bunch of time going through all of the.
Can everybody hear okay?
Sorry. So we're just going to get started with the actual numbers, which are the important things. You have the original allocation and then the backfill and the numbers that we started with here. Butte groundwater earned 0 in interest in 2023 because it has no money left. It had one final bill from that contract that came through in the beginning of fiscal year 2023. And sorry, as a reminder, the fiscal year runs from July 1st, 2022 to June 30th, 2023. There was no general expenses, revenues, or liabilities expended under the Butte groundwater, excuse me. And there's a deficit of $693,000. And I am just going to be rounding these numbers because you do have the exact numbers in your packet. With that, it's because of the transfer to the Parrot, and that will be covered by any potential payback from the Parrot once that is done and money is moved back over based on the percent that was given. So moving on to aquatics. Aquatics earned interest of 1.6 million this fiscal year, expenses of 1.8 million, and general expenses, revenues, and liabilities of 36,000. That leaves us at a balance of 37 million this fiscal year, or at the end of fiscal year 23. Terrestrial earned interest of 164,000, expenses of just under 110,000, and general expenses, revenues and liabilities of 64,000. That leaves the terrestrial pot of money with just over 3.7 million. And then we also have the aquatic reserves that earned an interest of 560,000. And it leaves that with a balance of just under 12.8 million. With the terrestrial reserve as well, that earned essentially 240,000, and it has a balance of just under 5.5 million. That leaves us with the total for the restoration categories this fiscal year of interest at essentially 2.6 million, expenses of just over 2 million, general expenses, revenues and liabilities, 700,000, and a total of 58.4 essentially million. So we also have the other encumbered funds. These are our grants, which has a current balance of essentially 1.5 million. Dutchman, which is just under 1.4 million. It's Milltown category with 40,000, leaving a total encumbered of 5.2 million available. So for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund in total, the cash and invested cash value is 63.6 million. You will see in our accounting system, the Savers Fund balance does show that it's 67.9 million. And in your packet, that explains why there's that difference, but I can go over that if you have questions. So these are just some of our other funds that NRDP manages. We have Butte Area 1 with interest revenue of 263,000, expenses of 414,000, and a cash balance of 5.7 million. Then we have the Clark Fork River Operable Unit Fund that has an interest of 1 million, expenses of 1.9 million, and a fund balance of 23.9 million, or excuse me, a cash balance of 23.5. The Smelter Hill Uplands Fund had an interest of 325,000, expenses of 373,000, and a cash balance of 8.6 million. The Parrot Fund earned interest of 300,000, expenses of 3.7 million, and is sitting at 3.5 million cash. And then we have the Seafoot Fund that's earned an interest of 52,000, expenses of 423,000, and a balance of 865,000. And then just to show you, you were provided this in your packet as well. It's a list of tables. We're not going to go through all the numbers, but it is updated with the expenses through the end of the fiscal year for all of the aquatic and terrestrial and recreation projects. That is.
Go ahead, Steve Hill.
Steve Hill, kind of, Miranda, on the very first slide, you said there's a deficit of new groundwater. That was going to be covered by the recovered money from Parrot, correct?
Potentially, yeah. Whatever's left over from the Parrot when that's completely done and paid back in the percentages that was paid into that fund.
Okay, it seems like there's a lot of projects depending on that level. Does this have an impact on anything we did at the last meeting?
I'll give that to Doug.
This is Doug Martin. Steve, no. So the any refunds from the Parrot project, there is the money that went into the Parrot from the different funds. There is there's a flow chart and it's documented that the money that is left over from the Parrot comes back out to those funds. So the money that we're talking about going back to the Butte groundwater was a separate pot of money. The money that we were talking about going to the Upper Clark Fork Basin at the last meeting, that comes back from the Parrot in a separate, in the same, whatever's left over, but it comes back as a percentage. So there was always money going back to Butte groundwater. There's always money going back to the Butte Area One Restoration Fund and then money coming back to the Upper Clark Fork Aquatic and Terrestrial.
Okay, all right, thanks, Doug.
Any other questions from the council? Public? Thank you, Miranda.
It's just on this one. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Brian Bartkowiak with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'll be giving the aquatic flow update and then turning it over to Nathan. It is always our privilege and our staff's privilege to be able to give these updates. They include a lot of work that we do, not only with landowners and water users, but also our partners, the Clark Fork Coalition, Trout Unlimited, Watershed Restoration Coalition, of course, the tribes, the other state agencies, and the cities and counties that we work with. So again, you know, we get the fun part to stand up and talk about these projects, but thank you all for your work and your cooperation on these. So just a few reminders before we get into the updates. We did put these tables in your packets. We started putting them in last year. They provide a very good summary and very quick way to reference the project updates. We have one for flow, aquatic projects, terrestrial and recreation. So just a reminder to take a look at those. I always like starting off with going over the goals of the restoration plan. The goals for the aquatic restoration plan are to, one, restore the main stem trout fishery by improving recruitment from fish from tributaries, replace trout angling in the main stem by improving trout populations in the tributaries, and maintaining or improving native trout populations in the upper Clark Fork River Basin to preserve rare and diverse gene pools and improve diversity and resilience of the trout fishery. We have all the watersheds in the upper Clark Fork Basin broken into priority 1 and priority 2 stream areas. Priority 1 stream areas are German Gulch, Browns Gulch, Warm Springs Creek, Racetrack, and the Little Blackfoot River. The other ones shown in light blue are the priority 2 stream areas. Again, kind of refresher again, the project types to achieve the goals that I just talked about. Number 1 is flow augmentation. So I like to refer to that as any way, shape, or form to getting more water into the creeks and rivers. After we have more water in, we want to prevent fish from getting stuck in irrigation or prevent entrainment of fishes from getting stuck in irrigation dishes by using fish screens and other methods, and also improve passage both upstream and downstream for fish movement. Riparian habitat protection and improvement, as well as in-stream habitat and improved stream function are also priority actions. Now to get to the updates, well, one more quick reminder. So for flow priorities, we have it broken into priority areas. The highest priority is the main stem Clark Fork, shown in red, between Warm Springs and Deer Lodge. Second in priority are the priority 1 or priority 2 tribs that are shown on here inside the injured area, and third in priority are the priority tribs outside of the injured areas. Just to give you a little reference about what we'll be talking about today, we're up at the top of the figure in Deer Lodge. I'll be talking about 3 monitoring stations, the Clark Fork River at Galen, the Clark Fork River at Deer Lodge, and the Clark Fork River at Jim Back Road. I'll touch the computer. As most of you know, this year was a very good flow year. Flows on the main stem Clark Fork at Galen stayed above flow targets for the entire season. We did have, sorry, let me back up. Date on bottom, the y-axis, primary y-axis is flow, and flow is the blue line here. Secondary y-axis is temperature, shown in this gray here. This line down here is the flow target at Galen. line up here is our critical temperature threshold, or 20 degrees C for trouts. So we did have a very good flow year. Flow stayed above minimum flow targets for the majority of the year. However, we did get afternoon temperatures exceeding critical threshold for trout in the afternoons. Looking at the gauge at Deer Lodge, very similar trend. We stayed above flow targets, but again, afternoon temperatures in July and up to about mid-August exceeding 20 degrees C. Looking at some graphs from the Clark Fork Coalition's monitoring, looking at Genback Road. Again, flow on the y-axis, date on the x-axis. Blue line is this year's flow record. Red line is 2017, which was a fairly poor year for flow. And then dotted line was the average from the 7-year average. So you can see again, flows were fairly good for the entire season, especially compared to 2017, where we had some flows in the single digits. So you got to put a sign up here that says "Don't touch screen." Looking at some of the projects, and these were primarily completed by our project partners, the coalition. We did have 3 in-stream flow change apps approved this year. They were flows or water rights associated with the former Deer Lodge River Branch for about 6 CFS. Another water right associated with the former Dry Cottonwood Creek Ranch for about a little over 4 CFS. And then our program back in the grant program bought the Parrot Pond property, or Racetrack Pond, and converted those water rights to in-stream flow for about 8 CFS. Second successful release from Racetrack Lake. Again, date on the y-axis, flow on the x-axis. Red line is where the release is measured, which is a cement ditch. The purple bluish line is the Clark Fork Station right at the frontage road. So that's a representation of water that's actually making it to the Clark Fork River. This box that doesn't show up very well on here is the time frame of the release, but you can see we had a fairly good amount of water make it to the Clark Fork River through this release. Again, this is cold, clean water coming down from Racetrack Lake. Touch the green again. The other project that we've talked about in detail at the last meeting was the split season leases associated with Valentin Ditch. So we're leasing our property to the Bricos, who in return are discontinuing their water rights late season. This council just approved the motion to initiate another split season water lease with Broken Circle. This would essentially shut down Valentin Ditch for late season irrigation withdrawals. And associating with this, and again, talked about it in the last meeting, we've done some pretty intensive monitoring of what split season leases are doing to crop health. And tomorrow will be the 6th meeting of the Stream Flow Working Group in 2023. This is a group of water users, other stakeholders, government agencies, the tribes, and we're, again, our mission is to pursue solutions that support and balance the water needs of the Upper Clark Fork River watershed communities. So if you're interested, come back down to Deer Lodge, right down the street, Penn Convention Center, 10 o'clock tomorrow, for the final flow group meeting of 2023. And that is about it for me. I have been putting a bunch of flow monitoring reports up on our website. So if you, I'm of course happy to take questions now, but if you want some more information or want to dive into the monitoring reports or see the details of the Racetrack Lake flow release, all those, all the reports from last year are up there, and the ones from 2023 will be up as soon as they are completed. And with that, I'd be happy to turn it over for questions.
Council, any questions?
Mike Paphausen from Butte. Where is Racetrack Lake Not familiar.
Racetrack Lake is way up in the headwaters of the Flints. And so it is, Andy, how far above Racetrack Campground?
Well, full to the Clark Fork from the lakes, like 23 miles. It's about 13 miles from the lake to. Actually, a little bit further. Yeah, it's about, 15 miles from the lake down to the first diversion.
And all those losses were just groundwater loss?
Yes, it gets complicated, but we have a release from the lake and then we are guaranteed a release. We're 7.5 CFS below cement ditch. And then from there, we account for our natural groundwater loss, other senior water rights, irrigation diversions, and that's what gets hopefully about 2 CFS to the river. But if you ever want to take your ride up to Racetrack Lake, it's a great ride. We'll take your truck though, Pat.
Okay. Side by side.
And that was Andy Fisher with the Clark Fork Coalition for the people online.
Any other questions? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Nathan Cook, and I'm going to be talking about aquatic non-flow projects today. I'm also going to touch on fish screen operation and maintenance work that we've been doing along with irrigators and our other partners. So, do not touch, okay. Something. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about the aquatic and fish monitoring that we've been participating with along with Fish, Wildlife and Parks. So start off with, we'll talk about some of the projects we were working on in 2023. These again are aquatic projects. We completed 2 projects in priority tributaries. One of those projects was on Cottonwood Creek, the Aspen Road Phase 2 project, and then a habitat enhancement project on Flint Creek on the slaughter and root properties. I'm not going to talk about all these projects where we're in progress or the design phase. There's more information about those projects in your packet and also in the table, but happy to answer any questions on them today while we're here. I am going to highlight the 3 projects here. You can see in bold. Maybe it's not showing up that well, but I will go more detail into that Flint Creek project, as well as 3 projects we worked on Blacktail Creek and fish passage projects going on in Warm Springs Creek. And then again, I'm going to be talking about more about the monitoring and the O&M on fish screens, as well as the main stem fish populations. So the Flint Creek Root Slaughter Project is a habitat enhancement project near the Hall area on Flint Creek. Charter Limited was the lead on this project. And again, this is a riparian and in-stream habitat project. And if you remember those restoration actions that Brian talked about, flow and fish entrainment and fish passage are the highest priority actions, not only in Flint Creek, but throughout all of our watersheds. But these type of habitat projects can also be high priority, particularly when there's a lot of cost share, a lot of match being brought into these projects. And so this project is a good example of that, where Trout Unlimited was able to find a whole bunch of matching funds. The NRD funding from aquatic and terrestrial restoration plans contributed about 1/3 of the funding for these projects. Other sources of funding were the DEQ 319 program, Future Fisheries from FWP, and then TU chapters. And the NRD portion of this paid for the design and some of the revegetation and the wildlife. Another project we'd like to highlight today is the bull trap passage projects on Warm Springs Creek surrounding the Silver Lake infrastructure. The goal of this project is to construct fish traps that will help FWP capture bull trout migrating upstream in this watershed and assist them to pass upstream and go do their thing as they spawn. And all these structures are part of Butte Silverbo's water delivery infrastructure. The current status of this project is the design has been complete. still chipping away on the permitting, which is rather intensive. Currently reviewing bids and looking at home to construction in 2024. And this is a complex project with a variety of stakeholders and partners. And again, this is a project where our partners, particularly China Limited, has been able to contribute a large amount of match, mostly from federal funds and the infrastructure bill. The next watershed we're going to highlight today is Blacktail Creek, and there's currently 3 projects in progress on Blacktail. The first one is Butte Golf Course, and that is a fish passage project. It's Blacktail Creek essentially, in current condition, flows into a pond on that golf course. So working on a project there to enhance fish passage and put a screen on the water going to that pond. The Butte Silver Glow sewer line is the one in the picture here. Currently completed the conditional letter of map revision for both that project and the golf course project. But again, that's another fish passage project where the sewer line going across the creek is an impediment to fish moving upstream. Similarly, the Roosevelt Drive culverts, another fish passage project. This is one that Butte Silverbow got a Federal Highway Administrative grant for, and actually the FHA is taking the lead on that project. So to date, we and our partners have put in a lot of fish screens throughout the basin. It's one of the primary restoration actions that we've worked on. And, you know, what we're seeing and what we kind of realized in the early days is that these kind of projects are going to require maintenance over time. You can't just stick these things in the ground and then expect everything to be hunky-dory. So one way that we approach maintenance on these projects is to have maintenance agreements with irrigators, and these are often pretty long-term agreements in terms of who's going to do what in terms of maintaining these structures. And we also work with partners like the Watershed Restoration Coalition to perform maintenance activities. For instance, the WRC performed maintenance on 12 screens in the upper part of the basin in 2023. And they're also keeping a maintenance log and are going to give us a report on recommendations going forward and how we can do a better job maintaining these structures in future years. Trout Unlimited also does a lot of work on fish screen maintenance. And then we work directly with the irrigators. A lot of times they're the ones out there cleaning these things themselves. So, you know, for instance, in this picture on the bottom part of your screen here, that's one of the corrugated water screens, part of the Allendale project on Flint Creek. And it's corrugated because you can see those kind of ridges there. And in those ridges, that's an aluminum plate. It should be shiny metal. And there's holes in that plate. And the water goes down through those holes into the ditch. But in this case, you can see it's kind of brown. It's been fouled by debris during high flows in the spring. So it takes a lot of work to keep those screens clean during that type of year during the spring, and there's a lot of debris coming down. You need to clean it, you know, at least every day, if not more often. We also work with our partners and irrigators on modifying equipment. Sometimes the equipment's wearing out. Sometimes there's just tweaks we can make to make these things run better. And then we also work with FWP to do pretty extensive fish monitoring. We can't monitor every screen, but FWP is focusing a lot on these structures at Allendale, on Flint Creek, and then a series of fish screens on Cottonwood Creek as well. So we're hoping that we can learn lessons in those 2 watersheds that we can apply to other fish screening projects. And speaking of it with FWP, we work with them very closely through a MOU to do monitoring on the main stems. That's the main stem, Clark Fork River, Silverbow Creek, all the priority watersheds, and then select projects like the fish screen projects I mentioned in the last slide. Currently, there's a lot of focus into understanding the factors of what's going on with the main stem brown trout population. In particular, you heard me up here before talking about how those fish numbers are lower than we'd like them to be and lower than they used to be. And so FWP has 7 sections on the main stem Clark Fork River that they sample every spring in April. The most upstream one is what we call the pH shack section. It's just downstream of the confluence of Warm Springs Creek and the Clark Fork River, or Silverboat Creek, if you know where that is. So the very headwaters of the Clark Fork River. And that's a spot that FWP actually has data going back to the 60s, the late 60s. But this graph is only showing the brown trout population from 96 on. And you can see it's, generally declined. It's really dramatically declined since, say, 2013, when there was over 1,800 fish per mile. Compare that to the spring in 2023, less than 30 fish per mile at that same section. So it's clear that that population has declined. It has not rebounded like it has in previous years. And so we're doing a lot of work to try to understand why that might be. And one of the things we've been working on is looking at brown trout recruitment. So when we say recruitment, it's just kind of a fancy fish head word for the production and survival of small fish. So fish are spawned, and then they survive to grow to be some older age. So FWPs look really carefully at the age structure up there. And what they're seeing is that there's some age 1 fish. And so in this picture here of these brown trout, that small fish is what we expect to see at age 1 fish. That next size up, that's an age 2 fish. So they're seeing some of those age 1s out there, but very few of those age 2 and older fish. They're just not surviving to those older ages. And it begs the question, okay, where are these fish coming from? Or more importantly, where are they not coming from compared to where they used to be back when we had, over 300, 600, 900 fish per mile? So one of the ways that we're looking at is through this technique called otolith microchemistry. This is something you may be tired of hearing me talk about. I think I stood up here in 2016 and talked about an otolith microchemistry study, but it's a really handy way to be able to tell where fish are coming from in the drainage. You can tell if they're coming from the tributary or from the main stem by looking at the chemical signatures in these bones called otoliths. So in this graph, it's not important to really look at which chemical signatures we're looking at. The main takeaway there is that it changes as that fish ages. So you can actually see at which age that fish moved from a tributary to the main stem based on the chemistry in this particular bone. And so we did for restoration action. And back in that study, just looking at the reach from Deer Lodge to Warm Springs, that's that location where we've seen this big decline in brown trout. Back in 2017, about 64% of those fish were spawned in the main stem. That's what their oil study told us. I'm sorry, 36% were spawned in the main stem, 64% from the tributaries. So, roughly 1/3 main stem origin fish. You compare that to a study that we're just completing in 2023. Those main stem fish only provided about 8% of the recruitment, and 92% of the fish coming from tributaries. So under the current conditions, most of the fish in that part of the Clark Fork River where we've seen the big decline are coming from the tributaries. We've lost a lot of main stem production. However, we can't explain the magnitude of that decline just by the loss of main stem fish. It's as if the tributary fish aren't surviving very well either, although it does seem to be hitting the main stem fish hard. We just got the results from this in the last few weeks, so we're still kind of working through what we can do with these data. Like I said, we can actually look at the age structure and see at what age are these fish not surviving in the tributaries or the main stem. We're also working with FWP to take the results of this study and do design future studies, such as tagging studies to document where mortality is occurring. We've been working with our partner agencies on water quality. A lot of agencies like DEQ, USGS have really good data sets on water quality going back that we need to dig into and see what trends have been occurring there. And we're going to be looking at the location and quality of habitat, not just adult habitat, but habitat for small fish that seem to be particularly impacted. That's all I've got on the aquatic stuff. I guess we'll take questions on aquatics while we're here.
Question.
So could you state your name, please?
Yes, Katie Garson Borba with DEQ.
So through all the sampling that you guys are doing, and I know the odorless stuff that you're taking on, is that capturing fish in the warm springs ponds at all, or looking at any of the potential? How are you guys factoring that into some of the main stem stuff you're sampling?
FWP does do surveys on the warm springs ponds. And their most recent sampling, the numbers there did not seem off from what they've been in the previous years.
Okay.
It's always been a case where they stock a lot of fish into those ponds and not a lot of them survive, but the ones that do grow to be very big. And that's a similar thing that I saw in the most recent step.
I have a question that's not directly related to this MIC sock, the NRDP. But I noticed all of the partners that you have in all of these projects. And the thought came to me over the years, because I've sort of been a ground shop, but you know, not exactly in an injured area, but the results are amazing and really positive. And is there any way we could find out, based on using NRDP funds for seed money, how much we actually generated in improvements to the main stem and the water around it? Like, we put in $10,000 and that partner put in 60. I think that would be a really good number to have when you sell the program. But I have no idea what it might be. Doug might know. I have a close guess, but I'm assuming it's well over 15% of what we've contributed.
This is Doug. Maybe you'd have to restate your question because I was thinking you were going somewhere else. But sorry.
What's the multiplier for the funds NRDP has supplied to mainstream flow in fish versus the actual cost of what's been accomplished?
This is Doug. I cannot answer that. I'd have to sit down and do some work with that, but we could do that.
If you look over the years, I think it's substantial.
It would be, yes. There's a lot of other funds.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for the presentation. It's really good.
But on that main stem, I mean, from 2013 on, how much of this is just related to, in FWP's opinion, the temporary loss of habitat during remedy of all of the streams? Because there's been a lot of, dead willows and undercut banks and things like that that were removed out of necessity to clean up the floodplain. And as those willows re-recruit and come back and kind of provide that normal habitat that you would think of brown trout would like, do you anticipate them to return back to the main stem? Like, it's not a chemistry issue, it's more of they don't like the sunlight problem?
The expectation was there would be some impact, some short-term impact to, removing vegetation and the bank habitat and that cover. That's really important, particularly for brown trout. The magnitude of the declines suggests that may be going on, but something else is going on.
Yeah.
And maybe they're compounding each other, but, in other restoration projects, sometimes you'll see a short-term thing where that disturbance affects that population, but they rebound pretty quickly, particularly as that vegetation comes back, like you said. And we just haven't seen that here. And I just showed you the graph of that pH shack section, but FWP's got sampling sections on every inch of the river at this point that they've looked at. And we've seen this decline take place in areas that have been remediated, areas that haven't been remediated, areas where the habitat looks pretty good, areas where it could be better. And so it's not the full story. It's certainly part of the story, and we can't ignore it.
Similar declines in other watersheds that are on the other side of the divide too, like the Big Hole, the Beaverhead, the Ruby, the Jeff.
Yeah, and so that's something we have to consider too, is that, is there some sort of regional problem going on? There is clearly similar trends between the Clark Fork and the Big Hole and the Ruby.
Yeah, all in Southwest Montana proper, so to speak.
Steve Hill, Anaconda, are their spawning habits changing? I mean, the period that they spawn, and could that contribute to some of their mortality?
That is a really good question, Steve. And FWP has, they surveyed brown trout redds and counted them in the tributaries going back, a decade now. They just recently started doing the same thing in the main stem. So I think we have a little, a less clear picture of the timing of what's going on in the main. So I think we're still wrapping our heads around it, but certainly with, warming water temperatures and potentially there's potential for water chemistry to affect the timing of that spawning too. That's a real possibility.
Katie Garson Porter with DEQ. Has there been any sort of climate impact analysis talked about amongst the agencies with just now that in mind with the changing water chemistry and looking at the main stem with the tributaries and how that's all interconnected with the aspect of climate change?
I would say that brown trout, it's been studied less for brown trout. A species like bull trout that are highly dependent on cold water. There's been a lot of research that have gone into that and, predicting where they're going to persist and where they're more in trouble. But it does seem like these places where brown trout are struggling are where they were already sort of marginal in terms of water temperatures. And I think the Clark Fork River is a good example of that.
Any additional questions? Public or online? Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
If you want to.
We haven't even been going an hour. I think we could, is everybody okay if we don't take the break right now? All right, let's keep going.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ray Vinkey with the Natural Resource Damage Program. I'm going to be providing updates on terrestrial projects that we worked on in 2023. I'll briefly touch on the goals of our work according to the restoration plan, work accomplished, as well as monitoring activities in 2023. As Brian pointed out, a lot of the work we do is accomplished through partners. That definitely enhanced the capacity of the program. Some key partners in 2023 included Trout Unlimited, Watershed Restoration Coalition, and Fish, Wildlife and Parks. Anyway. All right, so broadly speaking, our goals in the terrestrial elements of the restoration plan are to restore injured terrestrial resources and associated ecological recreational services. And also, that's the first goal, secondarily, to replace those injured resources. And also, thirdly, to replace lost hunting, wildlife viewing, and other outdoor recreational opportunities to ensure access to those resources. So we work again to restore, to replace the resources themselves, and then to replace lost access. So, all right, so in 2010, NRDP worked with Fish, Wildlife and Parks to prioritize landscapes to work in across the watershed. This is similar to what we did for tributaries. We identified 9 landscapes throughout the watershed, basically to focus our work rather than across a 2.25 million acre landscape, just to 9 areas. So, all right, so the project types that we use to meet our restoration goals are lands acquisitions, conservation easements, as well as habitat enhancement projects. Those habitat enhancement projects focus on riparian and wetland habitats, as well as grassland and shrub grassland habitats. That's because what riparian and wetland habitats in particular have a disproportionate value for fish and wildlife compared to their footprint on the landscape. Monitoring is a very important element of evaluating our progress towards meeting our goals and informs our future actions. So you'll see here this little guy on the left. Oops. This is a longbird long-billed curlew, and it's an example of a species which is rare and declining across the state of Montana and benefits from our restoration action specifically to restore grassland and shrub grassland habitats. So, and this is the Stuckey Wildlife Management Area in the spring, spotted dog, elk on spotted dog wildlife management area in the winter. These were both WMAs that were purchased using restoration funds during the grant cycle, and they're a very good example of replacement projects. So one, as I mentioned, conservation easements, purchase those easements, and a tool that we use to replace lost resources. We have contributed to the purchase of 13,000 acres under the restoration plans, conservation easements on 5 different properties. So there were some smaller conservation easements that were that we contributed to before the implementation of restoration plans, but the dry cottonwood, Gravely, Clark Fork River Ranch, Bucks Palm, those are all easements which were acquired subsequent to adoption of the 2012 restoration plans. So in 2023, I went out with some of our partners with 5 Valleys to look at these conservation easements, and they're all meeting their goals. They're the landowners have their management and provision of access are consistent with the expectations that were captured in the easement terms. As I mentioned earlier, access is a really key important element, a key component of terrestrial projects, and we did those conservation easements in 2022 provided over 3,700 acres, 3,700 hunter days. The data for 2023, we don't have available yet because the hunting season is still ongoing. So, oops. All right, so since the adoption, the restoration plan, NRD has contributed funds to purchase about 1,400 acres of additions to the Garrity Wildlife Management Area. That's west of Anaconda. It provides important habitat for a whole variety of species. It was initially purchased because of its value for big game winter range, particularly elk. But subsequent additions, the Stumptown here, North Garrity there, they've all served other resources. There's values for wetland associated species as well as a bull trout here in the Stumptown Division. And yeah, Garrity is a really critical component of the landscape and public enjoyment of natural resources in Anaconda. So its purchased those additions have replaced lost habitats and their services. 2023, the department worked to complete a boundary survey in preparation for fencing on one element of the addition, the Stumptown addition here. And our monitoring is essentially accomplished by Fish, Wildlife and Parks through their annual maintenance and activities on the WMA. All right, so the Clark Fork River Ranch is kind of a cool example where it serves both restoration, remediation, probably in the future, and also replacement of lost resources. Brian talked a little bit earlier about the split season lease that we're working on to keep more water in the river late in the summer. But ownership of the Clark Fork River Ranch is going to facilitate remediation of the Clark Fork because the state owns now 5 miles of riverfront where we're going to have to remove hazardous materials. So another element of the Clark Fork River Ranch, again, is it provides important hunter access, almost 500 days in 2022. There's important grassland and shrub grassland habitats in the uplands, as well as riparian habitats in the bottom, which have been replaced by purchase of the property. In 2023, our primary actions were replacement of a solar panel, which provided energy for the pump that was not functioning appropriately. We constructed grazing exposures to better monitor vegetation response to grazing in the future, and also completed some weed control. So we are doing relatively intensive monitoring on the Clark Fork River Ranch of range condition, crop production, and water use, and both of those to measure the efficacy of the split season water use or split season lease. So, but yeah, the Clark Fork River Ranch has been interesting because it again serves multiple goals of the program. All right, so for restoration projects in 2023, we worked on a project here in the Hollenbeck Ranch that's actually still ongoing. It entails the development of 4 water development projects with the goal of keeping cattle out of the riparian area and better facilitating management of grazing by landowner. So we also completed with the lead of Trout Unlimited. Oh, so here it is. Restoration of 1 mile of stream in Upper Willow Creek. There was significant match the TU found from the DEQ, as well as other chapters and NRDP funding all allowed. Again, the restoration of a mile of Upper Willow Creek. So let's see. Also in 2023, we established monitoring sites at 4 places where we've done water developments in the past: Sand Hollow, Brock Creek, the North Fork Spring Creek, and Gulf Creek. And yeah, again, it's really essential that we monitor our work, just like we do with the fisheries, to see how effective it is and if it has a good cost benefit ratio. So for 2024, we're looking at working on conifer encroachment projects on 2 ranches, most likely. The goal is to keep conifers out of grasslands, so that those grasslands retain highest value for associated wildlife species. Antelope are one good example here, and so there are antelope in the Garnets where we will be working. And yes, that's sort of a trend, throughout the West, as we have encroaching conifers in the grasslands that results in deterioration of grassland habitats. And yeah, another neat thing is, and we're probably going to be able to use thin conifers to contribute to reconstruction of riverbanks on Clark Fork. So, all right. So again, terrestrial monitoring. We work with our partners, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, as well as those who monitor our conservation easements, Five Valleys Land Trust and Montana Land Alliance, to monitor the WBAs and conservation easements. Also, the habitat enhancement projects monitoring is being accomplished with our partners, Trout Unlimited and the Watershed Restoration Coalition. And NRDP, as I noted, is monitoring our work on the Clark Fork River Ranch. Generally, what we've learned is that the replacement projects, purchase of wildlife management areas and conservation easements are meeting our goals of replacing lost resources, including recreational opportunities. For the restoration/enhancement projects, what we're seeing is it is really important that we have long-term funding for operations and maintenance. For example, we've got to ensure that fences remain up and when they're protecting riparian corridors, to ensure that those protections remain in place. So conifer encroachment projects do have a high cost benefit. We just did a little demo removal with the DNRC, some thinning of conifers in the aspen stand, and that's pretty neat. Already there's birds using that stand that weren't in the past. So Austrian water developments, like I said, that we're working on this year and we've completed in the past. They do, because of the current economic environment, they're pretty costly, and both monetarily and in terms of personnel time. And we're still evaluating, I guess, they're moving forward what the best, if they're going to be cost effective relative to their ecological benefit. So, and I think, so I'm also going to give some brief updates on recreation projects, but at this point, I guess I'll offer folks the opportunity to ask any questions about the terrestrial work, so.
This is Mike Pathausen from Butte. The project, the acquisition project that was west of Anaconda, was that also done in conjunction with the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation?
So Garrity's had some of the purchases west of town. So the quick summary is the initial purchase of Garrity that was facilitated by the Elk Foundation. That was approximately, it was 9,000 acres, and they were a bridge party. So they stood in and purchased the property until the federal state funding was available. The RY edition, which was one that I worked on significantly, that was for specifically targeted for calving and winter range. That was 640 acres. The Elk Foundation kicked in some funds for that. But they did on all the editions. They've been a very critical partner across the watershed on Garrity as well. So thank you. Yes.
Christy Beal, Missoula. First, I know we have PC Hackathorn here with TU. I've heard a lot of comments during these updates about TU bringing funding and matching to the projects. And I just want to say thank you as a council member and a member of the public. Thank you for that. Much appreciated. Question I have on the conifer removal for the grassland habitat enhancement. Are we looking at, I mean, I know that conifers encroaching into grasslands is sometimes it's just part of the ecological process, evolution. Are we being wise about where we're spending the money doing that?
Yeah, so just speaking to that point, one reason we have such significant conifer encroachment in grasslands in the west is the suppression of fire. And that's, so agencies are trying to use mechanical means to remove conifers, where in the past they would have been removed by fire. But to your question as to whether we're achieving the most sort of bang for the buck in terms of where we do that work is, that's by working in priority landscapes like the garnets, which has especially high value for mule deer and some other grassland associates. On a watershed scale, we're directing those enhancement projects to the best place. And then actually neat case is we're most likely going to work with the Porcella family next year to thin conifers on their property, and conifers from their property will be used, as I mentioned, to basically put wood into the stream bank. So we're going to have a really high benefit there because we don't have to ship or find coarse woody debris from some other place. We're going to use conifers that are contributing to restoration actions and remediation. So anyway,
Thank you. Other questions from the council?
Mike Pathausen from Butte. Are conifers native or are they considered invasive? I guess I don't know.
Sure. So no, they're native species. Typically what's being targeted is actually Douglas fir, sometimes juniper that are encroaching into grasslands. And it's just that they're becoming more prevalent on the landscape because it's changing, ecological processes.
I've seen some of the project work on Mill Creek.
Yeah.
Down in the Snowcrest Range, for mule deer particularly down there. Do you guys ever do simulated burns instead of mechanical removal?
Go ahead.
Martin, Mike, I'll answer that. No, we've been asked if we would take on doing a prescribed burn, but it's been our position that the liability is pretty high to take on a prescribed burn. So we have stayed away from doing that. So.
Yeah. Anything else?
Any questions on electronic? What do you think about giving your voice a 5-minute break while we take a 5-minute bathroom break?
Sure.
Is this a good time to do that for you?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, we'll come back and we'll hear about the recreational projects. 5 minutes. Let's come back at 17 after 2 on that clock.
Oh.
Yeah, so orange shoots go in areas, and then there's other.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
This is a question.
It's just a couple slides, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Job of marketing.
I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Sorry, recreational, but truly, that's probably that's done. There really isn't a great. And that's the section, right? Whereas I can imagine, like, you could imagine that somebody would. Set up shuttle service every day.
Oh, yeah.
And they'd get the opportunity to pedal through and get picked up an opportunity to work with the shuttle bus. Right, so like once there's continuity, I see that they. And then. I don't know if you think you yet, I'm not sure if remedy is going there yet, but it's probably been held up by remedy. But like I said, once again, once they get that process, but it's right. I can't use for connectivity by trail all the way to that. Rest stop if you had an opportunity. There's gonna be one of the things that actually have Rob. It's gonna be a bike trail and we actually got right now our Town National Bike Association. It's also that's looking more for private citizens and 6 years ago, saying, you know, towns have a specific vision, renovation, the town is not going to succeed because some town governments and so I wrote a report to our president, and I forgot we're talking about now possibly starting on the very first marathon. Or have to run. So, yeah, there's gonna be a lot of recreation, what's not the benefits. I think it's the biggest issue. It's the project's great. No, you're welcome to very employer for its service. I did, I was. Yeah, and sometimes a message as to how cool this is. Once you can go for it, you can go 26 miles, if they were able to put my family, if they were able to put some kind of a surgery or some kind of a restaurant. I did. You could mess with some, you could have 26 miles, get some food, have a beer, and then 26 miles long, 1 mile a day. Well, it'd be awesome. I'm just, can't get a great summer and then it would benefit the community of Aquatic, they would probably do that. And then there'd be a restaurant there that I think would do well. People really get anywhere that we're getting much. Yeah. So it'd be a great place to do it, and then all of a sudden you have recreation, and then you can do the same. In the winter time, I would smart. Turn it into a park trail. 26 mile trails. And we're like, yeah. Actually, new things in the take your ground. I don't see any there that I realize. There's a lot of ammunition of purchase.
But it still counts, right? So there's some.
There is kind of stuff. I think the state, there's a lot of money for kind of off. There's been that component of time value. I think there's been some amount of stuff policies and like that. Yeah. And the way this especially American. But I think again, we can. What I would hope to see is that communities of the Aquatic here lodge. City counties. And now and to conjure up can we hire a consultant? I'll come up with a business plan for how this is going. How this is going to perhaps biking, hiking, a bike trail with internet access to communities. Because that is, oh, man, that's areas. That's what, most of the outside, we interconnected communities. So I think we would provide. Yeah. Areas. Sound like Montana. I figured that's what the conference.
If you're my school, then.
I figured it's called fishing. Well, there's a ton of recreation.
Oh, yeah. That I don't know so. But
So I don't know about it, but Grand Canyon, somewhere in that area is where along the trail corridor, there's all these really interesting places down how Butte was initially populated, where they first found it. We didn't know, people didn't see it. Or they believed it's silver area, and then all of a sudden they realized this silver just got. Everything. So,
No.
So I think in there, a lot of that history. Along the trail system, lookouts, even, you know, look at a lot of different things. True. They have a Grand Mountain Memorial, but there. The memorial, it was the size of the exact. 37 stairs down. And you go around that memorial, actually buttons across. And you get in there, right? It's pretty cool.
I like the restaurant.
Oh, yeah.
Watering station.
Restaurant, market station, and like that. I did a, like a warming cut like you do on St. Christian Highway. I sent Anne's Pond to her, not the Bill Creek, but, you know, the scene that cuts the east and west Pioneers that connects Rise River and then there's where Crystal Park is. There's a warming line there that I think the snowmobile association wears, and they call it just, it's dry. There's no water, it's not they just have they just put a bunch of wood in it. And then people that go through a big fire and have a place to warm up. And it's really not that big. It's pretty cost and it's a great benefit. Fun. Yeah, I think we missed out. One of the things that the northwest part of the state's had a lot better in this area. They've renovated and rehabbed. And all of our interior. And one that I used to always love as a kid, the one right above it,
I have not received
touches driving through the look up and smell her and far in the distance, grassy knob. There's a fire there. And that actually collapsed right next year. And I'm like, man, we should just break it in the dough with all these little fire cones and.
Yeah.
You know, and, get a police and all. There'll be RBO, Airbnb. You do it around, backcountry skiers, and numbers of they do. I was, the hikers are doing too, hunters are doing too.
you state farm?
I am. They run it.
So I was in place of them, with that.
Yeah.
30 odd years, you know, they just sort of sign on it.
Yeah, that's what they have. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta make some call on that.
Yeah, who did you get?
The guy in California, and I don't even know him, and call me.
What's his name?
I think it's Nelson, but I just got.
Yeah.
It's more gravitating.
No, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I'm sure that was just an awesome.
Yeah, no, well, they don't write it in the same way, they kind of say like.
So I mean, yeah.
What's odd too is that there's an agent that's taking over.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, what they do is, State Farm.
Yeah.
State Farm has it. There's only so much they can give.
Well, that's what you guys said.
They got killed again.
Otherwise, you're not supposed to. They don't want you to have a cash cover statement. Sometimes what they do is they take, what's this called? 4 million, the back, and then they take the other. They would have a million, and not by any means, we ran it, I think.
They got brought back to that.
Ultimately, it's going to be.
So I don't know.
Going to be.
But you didn't see the
They might be some of rare. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, because you might end up. Called cash agency assignment is where We used to be over there, Jeff Guy. We didn't have anywhere to park, just a hand. It's something. Yeah. Well, I believe it's something that can. No, I don't. Trying to get it. That makes sense.
There was nothing even but.
So it's, it makes a decision about.
With us, we walked out. And same time.
Yeah, she goes for those couple of years, or the top floor, get on the top. Yeah, that's actually. Borderline type best people. Super guarantees. Oh, yeah. Great part of it. Bunch of people, my dad hired. Something called you guys, but you didn't hear it.
And we would have heard.
My guess is. As soon as the user comes into back.
No, the last ones I have.
Take a look at it closer.
Yeah, so. Yeah.
All right. Let's get started again, please, folks. Boys get arrested.
Was I sounding?
It's trying to say, hey, let's take a break.
Yeah.
All right. We'll start back up. And Ray, this is not on the agenda, but Ray's going to give us an update on the recreation as well.
Yeah, just a brief update. I've got a couple slides. So in the 2012 restoration plan, we identified six projects, and to date, 4 of them have been completed. In 2023, NRDP worked with FWP to develop 2 new fishing access sites, one at the vet clinic in Deer Lodge, or behind the vet clinic, and another at Collision Dam. So also at Milltown State Park, there was a geotechnical evaluation of the overlook. I think you guys remember that there's some issues there in terms of whether or not the existing overlook is gonna be safe in the future. And then the Greenway Service District also completed 2 miles of a trail. So the trail that they completed was from Crackerville to the rest area of Highway 1. And it's a 10-foot wide asphalt trail, which accommodates multiple user groups. It did come in under the cost estimate. The cost estimate was about $700K and the actual cost was close to $5. I drove by Gregson stop last week, and there were some users out there, so it's a good thing. So, but that's really all I've got for reckon updates. Guys have any questions? I know we've had some discussions about these projects in the past.
I mean, I have one, but it doesn't affect you directly. Why are we asking?
Hang on a second. Mick, wait a second.
Yeah.
Why are we asphalting them all when we couldn't maybe use compacted gravel or, and the only reason I asked you that is a lot of the trails are getting old. And I walk them, and they're all breaking up, there's plants coming up through, and they're getting low. Along Blacktail Creek there. And you super the interstate in Butte, it's starting to give you sample sections and asphalt's all peeled and broken up.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the peanuts plant, that's gotta cost millions of dollars to like stuff. Was that, do you have any idea what that decision can be? I'm not criticizing.
Yeah, I have my own observations along those lines, Mick, but I'm gonna pass this one to Doug or Pat, whoever wants to take it up.
So this is Doug. So Mick, there are a variety of ways to do the trail. This is the design that the Greenway Service District has, proposed. So this is the Greenway Service District, design that they put out and implemented this year. What they have proposed for when they came forward, seeking, funding this year was they did propose the next trail system, to be, I believe a decomposed granite or some sort of, non-asphalt trail. So.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ray.
And just this is Doug Martin again, just to note that we did add the Greenway this year because they did ask, people asked about it last year. It is not part of the current restoration plan. If it gets included in the revision, it will be part of the restoration plan going forward, but previously it was allocated under the process plan. It was given funding there, so it's not something that we've reported on in the past, but since they asked about it last year, we added it this year.
Yeah, Seth Makepeace with the drive. So Doug, I think it's a question for you, but what is the perspective on long-term O&M, whether it's screens or this or weed management? I mean, is there a common number is 15% of capital costs annually go into O&M. That's kind of a water-based number, but is there an O&M escrow account or a trust or anything for this work?
So this is Doug. Good question, Seth. So we do set aside funding for O&M. We've set aside in the aquatics specifically for O&M on the screens and the actions that we've taken there.
Okay.
With the knowledge that that infrastructure has a lifespan of around 20 years. So that's kind of the funding mechanism that we're looking there. Same thing on the terrestrial and non-screen projects, looking at 20-year or basing it off the years of the life expectancy of the equipment. As far as the recreational activities, the thing that we are looking at in the revision this year is getting the sponsors for those projects to commit to the long-term O&M prior to that funding. So that's one thing that we're looking for.
Any other questions for Ray? Thank you, Ray. Okay. All right, next we have the Parrot Tailings update with Jim Ford.
Yeah. All right, great. I'm Jim Ford. I'm the project manager for the Parrot Tailings project, and I'm going to give you a quick update today. So again, just a review, I think for most of you, about the funding for the project. Originally, our engineer's estimate was $37 million. This is the breakdown of where the money came from, what accounts. And also below in the bullets are the percentages. That's the percentages of any leftover money that goes back to those accounts. And of course, those percentages are the same percentages of where the money came from as a whole. So, for an example, Butte Silverbow groundwater, the $5.2 million is approximately 14% of the project total. So it's how much money went in for the project, and any remainder is how much goes back. This is a figure or picture you've seen before probably, but it's important just to note. We're very confident. Okay. Just a couple of things that I'm going to talk about here. This is an industrial site. It was a smelter, and so these materials were placed on site. Unlike the Clark Fork River that were distributed through floods and stream flow processes. This is an industrial site. So we had a very layered system up on the top here. We had poured slag, which we had to break up. We had the tailings themselves, which is this white lens. And then on the bottom, there's a black clay, which actually had the highest concentrations of contaminants in it. And that's the old floodplain of Silverbow Creek. And then below here at the bottom, bottom of the excavation, you can see groundwater surfacing. It's blue-green groundwater, and that's the super high concentrations of the contaminants, primarily they're copper and zinc here. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit because it plays into. So these projects, they're difficult in scale and in coordination with, like, particularly this project in the middle of town. But actually the solutions are pretty simple, and the primary solution for the Parrot was either removal of waste where waste was sitting in groundwater and contaminating groundwater, or where waste was above groundwater and infiltration was the primary pathway, was capping those materials. But you can see that it's the scale of the equipment that we get our cost effectiveness and limiting the distance you have to haul wastes. So I think if you've seen this figure before, down here in the left-hand corner, this red hashed area is our excavation area, our waste removal area. And that was done in 2 phases because we had to relocate the shops. This green hashed area is where we have our ET cover. So again, this is material that's covering waste that was left in place. But this is also waste that was not saturated by groundwater, which was above the groundwater level. And if some of you remember, the orientation of the actual smelter itself was just about like this through the site. And they put most of their waste out here, although there was certainly other high concentration materials in the back end. This blue line is our haul route. Again, we didn't utilize public roads to remove the waste, and the waste went to 1 or 2 locations that we call the stockpile area, or I forget what we call this, waste disposal area. Everything that was even at the stockpile area eventually ended up over here. But again, the key was not hauling it very far and not utilizing public roads. So I had some pictures. I decided just to go back with our figure. This is what's called the end land conditions. So this is in our agreement with Butte Silver Bow. Butte Silver Bow is the landowner for all this property. And this is what our agreement was to at the completion of the project, to turn the area back over to Butte Silver Bow. So again, we have the ET cover areas, which are going to have some long-term O&M requirements. We expect those to be minimal, as this is a 36-inch cap, revegetated with native species. So we expect a very low, it's an expensive cap, but we think the O&M, reduced costs for O&M far outweigh the additional costs up front. We have 2 developmental parcels is what Butte Silver Bow want to call them. Here they have just a cover crop on them. We have some permanent green areas here and here. And then there's, for right now, what is considered expanded parking. Now, because it's a restoration project, we only replaced what was existing there. So we didn't like pave this area because this area wasn't paved to begin with. But any pavement we did dig up, which is all around here, actually this excavation to the south extended, was down to the sidewalk here. That components of the asphalt we did replace. We also completely rebuilt Civic Center Drive. You know, the grade was different. This whole area, starting from about right here on up, came down about 20 feet. So we built that meeting modern standards. So it has sidewalks and lights, electrical. We replaced sewer lines, stormwater lines, all sort of underground utilities. We had to place in a water line and connected to the neighborhood over here. So there was lots of utilities, lots of roads, lots of asphalt. And as you're going to see, that's all that work's completed. We did the north parking lot in 22. In March, we finished all the waste removal. August, we did finish the ET cover system. Now, again, that needs to grow in. So that's going to need a couple more years of us monitoring it before we turn it back over to Butte Silver Bow. Got the south parking lot done in September, along with Civic Center Road. We had a little celebration at that opening. And so we've got a complete project. So again, the costs here, we've got the replacement of the shop, which was 14.4 million, and Butte Silver Bow did that work under an agreement with us. They completed it on time and on budget. The waste removal portion was about 16.6. And then there's this third component. I'm going to talk about this a little bit. So there are these monitoring costs, and that was not originally in the budget. The Butte Priority Soils consent decree had some additional liabilities placed in it that required us to do some initial monitoring, looking at the effects of the removal action. And that was, the CD was released after we started the project. So we didn't know about these requirements with the project. So far, we've spent $2.5 million on it, and we're spending about $500,000 a year. So I'm going to talk about that a little more just after this slide. So what do we get for the money we've spent? Approximately $30 million. We moved 1.4 million cubic yards of materials. 650 of that was wastes. So our wastes were not only the waste from the excavation area, but the slag, that poured slag. We pumped over 40 million gallons of the highly corrosive. So this water is about a pH of 3.8 and highly contaminated groundwater. So this water in many senses is more contaminated than the Berkeley pit. We reconstructed, rebuilt Civic Center Road, the parking lots, all the municipal services, water lines, sewer lines, all that. And we relocated and had rebuilt the municipal shop complex. So one of the things I think that's not fully appreciated is what we left was 2 parcels of land that are the uses are unrestricted. So unlike if we left waste in place, there would be restrictions on how that land could be used. And what Butte Silver Bow ends up with was two parcels of land that they're going to determine on how those are going to be used, but they're unrestricted. Okay, so I talked about the monitoring and the monitoring requirements we have in the CD because of this liability. So currently we're spending about $500,000 a year. I'm not sure if I've ever given you guys a presentation on this monitoring program, but it's pretty extensive. The CD has about, I think it's actually 7 pages long worth of liability for the state that basically BPAR could come after the state if anything we did on the Parrot affects their remedial infrastructure. What we'd like to do, get out from underneath this $500,000 a year we're spending, we'd like to combine our monitoring efforts with BP's monitoring efforts. So BP has a fairly complete monitoring system that they've got in place that they're required to do under the CD. We have some additional wells we installed as part of the Parrot, about 28 additional wells, but BP's monitoring, I think right now about 130 wells, so it's not excessive. We'd like to combine these efforts with BP so we don't have to spend this money. We can retain those additional savings, and then we can both individual, the state and BP, look at that data and see if we're seeing any detrimental aspects. Now, I can tell you right now, we've been monitoring for almost 5 years. We have not seen any negative impacts as it's defined in the CD. So we started discussions with BP in 2022. Didn't really, weren't able to get anything accomplished much this year. Doug just recently met with BP and it sounds like they're gonna work with us on looking at combining these, at a minimum, combining these monitoring efforts. Again, this is just a picture of what the actual groundwater looked like. This is actually below the black clay. This was in the first phase 1 excavation. The black clay was above groundwater in parts of that excavation. And this is what it looks like even below. So again, this is a groundwater project. This groundwater, some of which is captured by the subdrain, some of which was discharging to the creeks and impacting not only the surface water, but the in-stream sediments. That's it.
Question. Christy Beal, Missoula, on that liability, just 2 slides prior, if you can go back, and I'm just trying to get my head around this. So the $500,000 per year was being spent to ensure or to reduce the state's risk to exposure of liability to BPAR.
No, liability to the state.
Liability to the state, but BPAR, like you said, could come
Yes,
after the state if
yes,
if what the state is doing is creating problems for them.
that's right.
And to say $500,000, we're gonna have them do that monitoring, like, isn't that kind of having that?
Well, yeah,
Watch the hen house?
yeah, it would in a, probably in a normal sense, but in a surplus sense. They have their monitoring program all documented and laid out. And so what we would do is, and what we've already looked at their monitoring plan, right? We've studied extensively. We're not doing stuff that dramatically different. Under CERCLA, there's all sorts of requirements of how you monitor for groundwater. And so really the main difference is these additional 27 wells that we have that are primarily right adjacent to the subdrain. So if they, and they're utilizing data from those wells currently, like in development of groundwater. So they understand those wells are important to understand. We'd like them to combine them, agree what those, the monitoring requirements are. So we've stacked hands on how we're collecting the data. Now, we might interpret it differently, but at least we agree on how the data is getting collected. And so that's all done very transparently. We're not relying on them to interpret the data for us. We have our own team of people. We can do that, but at least we're saving the money. Like we sample like basically the same wells. Like I have a sampling crew, they'll sample it, use the same methodologies, and then BP's people go to the same well, do the same things. And it seems to be a little redundant. Now, if you were in litigation,
Which is what we're trying to avoid.
yeah, well, and if, I mean, if it was pre-CD, they wouldn't want to do that. Now that we're over the hump of the CD and the state signed on to the CD, I think they're much more willing to sharing that information. So we're gonna put together a plan specifying what the differences are, and they're gonna be minimal. You know, they're doing all this and it's probably gonna be look like this, and then propose to them, hey, if you could do this extra stuff for us, we can save this money. This money goes back to the accounts it came from for other restoration activities, right?
So this is Christy Beal again. Historically, when you're sampling out of the same wells, 2 different teams, are those 2 teams coming up with the same data?
Yeah, typically the requirement, the sampling methodologies are the same. The analytical methods are all structured. So, you know, what BP does is reviewed and approved by EPA, and it's using these standard methods. So yeah, we don't see much in the way of differences.
Okay, you're talking though about methodologies. I'm talking about actual outcome.
Yeah.
Regardless of how the methods are, if you're sampling out of the same wells, are you coming up with the same data?
Yes.
Okay, okay.
The difference historically has always been the interpretation of data. That is really where the difference is. We've never had an argument that we sample a well and we see 10, and they sample a well and they see 1. We've never had those sorts of problems.
This is Christy Beal again, Missoula. I get there's a cost benefit to sharing. What are the downsides to sharing in this monitoring? What are the downsides for the state? What are the risks?
The BP down the road, and this is just me personally, I mean, Doug, we've never talked about that internally, because this is like in real time that we just started discussions with them again. I think it would be that BP changes the monitoring plan down the road. You know, they decide that they want to do less than what we've agreed to now. So hopefully in our discussions with them, we'll discuss, because there's a limitation on this liability. It's only 5 years after we're complete. That's what's in the consent decree. So we'll agree on what they need to do and that they do it for the whole 5 years. And hopefully BP will be agreeable to that.
Without changes,
Yeah,
without changes that the state doesn't approve.
yeah, or agree to probably.
This is Doug Martin. One point that Jim and I have talked about and others and Pat and others, is that the monitoring to date hasn't, and AR agreed with this, when we met and talked. The monitoring to date hasn't showed any impact to their remedial infrastructure. So the Parrot project, that was their big concern, is that is there an impact from the Parrot project on what they're doing or will be doing? And the monitoring to date hasn't showed any adverse effects. So.
Yeah, we didn't think that there was much of a chance, like they were concerned that we would release a bunch of mercury, say, into groundwater. We don't see mercury as a big groundwater problem, but we didn't think that would occur. What we have seen though is dramatic decreases in groundwater concentrations, but that's what we're trying to do, right? So that's not a negative impact.
Christy Beal, at this point in discussions, is it something that the state could introduce as one of the terms that BP would acknowledge in writing that they have seen no negative impacts from what the state is doing? Has done?
So this is Doug. Yes, when we do get into the discussions with AR, we will make sure that the state is well protected. We're not going to take on any additional a risk. If we cannot get to that point, we will continue doing our own work.
I mean, saving $500,000 a year, Christy Beal, is great. Just don't want to step over a dollar to pick up a dime in the long run.
Right.
No, yeah, we totally hear you on that. And one of the things we're also doing is we look at the data on about an annual basis, but every 2 years we go through a deep dive on it. And we're trying to find efficiencies within what we're doing already. You know, if there are wells that we can drop, if we can drop frequencies or types of analytical analysis, because more than half this cost is just analytical analysis in the lab, right? We don't have much control of that, although we do scrutinize what we pay the labs fairly thoroughly. So we're looking at cost efficiencies, even, you know, in parallel with this issue with BP, because again, we were talking with them in 2022, and I think we actually started talking with them right when the CD was finalized. So this has been going on a long time, and we need them to we need to get this going, but we need to do our part, which is like make a proposal, have something that they can react to, not put it on them and say, here's what we'd like you to do, here's what we think it is, and then they can make a determination.
Set the playing field first, yes.
Yeah.
Seth Vinkey said, are there action levels that are off ramps for monitoring? You know, where you can just really go into care and maintenance with that, or is it?
No, the way the CD is written, and you know, Catherine Hausrath, our attorney, would be the best one to speak to it. That it was really, in that respect, it was really vague, even though it's 7 pages long in the CD. In that respect, it wasn't like a concentration-based thing or anything. And it wasn't well-defined, although it was limited to the subdrain and the treatment lagoons that treat the water from the subdrain. So it's not like just anything. It's sort of limited to those two things. So it's groundwater related. I mean, when we were negotiating CD, we spent a lot of time on this back and forth. We're trying to limit it. They're trying to expand it. So there's nothing really. I wish there was something quantifiable in there.
So it's enduring, basically, other than the 5-year liability.
The 5 years though,
Yeah.
right? And so, you know, we haven't made it the official notification, but we're talking about, you know, like November here of 5 years from this point on, from completion of the project.
This is Katie with DQ. That answered one of my questions, was just when does that clock start for you guys? And then maybe out of optimism, how long do you think negotiations might take?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm hopeful. Doug met with BP. The summary I understand of it went well, that they're open to combining the monitoring efforts. So there's actually a part of this that I'm not talking about, but there's sort of two components. This monitoring effort, I think, is it's low hanging fruit. It's something I think we could easily come into alignment with them. The piece we would really like to work on is their reevaluating the whole groundwater capture system. And what we'd like them to do is this residual contaminated groundwater up here at the Parrot, is capture it here at the source instead of letting it flow downhill and then try to capture it like before it discharges into the creek. And so we've developed, it's a different presentation. We've looked at it, we've done some initial modeling, how many wells it would take, what the costs would be. MR said that they would work with us and take the water if that was needed, which is a massive cost savings, because we don't have to treat the water. It's worked in their system. We've had meetings with BP and EPA on that and DEQ, because of what's been going on around some issues and fill and stuff. We didn't have any real substantive meetings in 2023, but we'd like to get back from that because we think there's lots of advantages for BP to capture this water here. This water at the Parrot is what's fouling their subdrain and clogging. So if they can capture it here, then they don't have to deal with cleaning their subdrain. It reduces the amount of water in the BTL, and it reduces the worst water in BTL. And I think if it gives them a lot more latitude on their CD required groundwater capture down at Blacktail Creek, if they're capturing it up on at the source. So it's sort of like a belt and suspenders, right? The belt is you're capturing the waste at the source. The suspenders are, you also have a required capture system downhill for that same water. So they haven't disagreed in our meetings with BP. They understand and they want to work it in. But things on the CD and the CERCLA, they're part of the CERCLA process go really slow, much slower than we've been operating under. So we would like to get back into those discussions also.
Steve.
Steve Hill from Anaconda. I'm assuming that all this monitoring that you're talking about, BP and yours, at least part of it is basically environmental surveillance.
Yes.
But part of it also is performance monitoring for the ET cap.
Yes. Well, as a remedy component. So yeah, we are doing performance monitoring. We're looking at the performance of the money we spent here. But it's not specific to the ET cap. I think what we're going to do for the ET cap is use some suction lysimeters underneath the ET cap and look specifically at the performance of the ET cap with suction lysimeters. But we haven't, we're trying to get the waste out, get things buttoned up, get it back, get the road open and stuff. We've had that road closed for a number of years. So we're sort of focused on that, but I think we're going to do some monitoring specifically for the ET cover system.
Okay, one more, if you don't mind. So you're going to turn the surface of the ET cap over to Silver Volcano.
Yeah.
And there will be land use restrictions on that transaction, right?
Yes.
And so if Silver County does something to jeopardize that cap and something shows up in the groundwater that can be assumed to be a result of that failure of the cap, then the state has some liability for that, because the state won't control that cap.
Yeah. Well, we don't have the details of what the agreement might look like with Butte Silverbow. It's not part of the agreement for this project, but it will be part of the agreement when we turn this is the ET cover here. It's about 18 acres. When we turn that over, I think we're gonna have to work through those sorts of details.
Right.
About who, again, this waste was not the state's waste. The resulting contaminated groundwater is not the state's contaminated groundwater. That's BP's contaminated groundwater. And so we'll work with them. We have a really good relationship with Butte Silverbow, very productive. I mean, we've been working on this project and others for a long time. I don't see it as a big issue. This is, I'm not saying this to pat NRD on the back. It's a function of the design team. This is the best cap built in Butte. This is 3 feet thick. It's not 18 inches, it's 3 feet. And it's not only 3 feet, it's 3 feet of very special material that holds water and releases water. It's not sandy, it's not boulder bath. We had to bring this all the way in from Rocker. and it took us a couple of years just to find the specific material. It has a capillary break on the bottom, so we believe this cap is, we spent a lot of extra money up front to build it, and we think in the long term, the O&M is gonna be limited. Now, you can use these caps. I built one over in East Helena, where I worked at the smelter there. You can use these for fall courses or to walk, dogs or whatever. It can't be a motocross track.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Can't be destructive use, but these sorts of caps allow all sorts of uses. So we'll work with people to define what we think is acceptable, and we'll have some monitoring. Typically, you're worried about the vegetation failure, really, and the uses of that, and that's what we'll focus on.
So I assume you have pretty detailed as-bills. Because of permeabilities.
Yep.
Critical element of that.
Yep.
I just question the state taking on liability for someone else's problems. I've not known that to be the case in Superfund.
Yeah, the language that's in the CD doesn't exist in other CDs, and it's not, US Department of Justice has standard language for consent decrees under CERCLA, and it doesn't have anything like this. But at that point, we had already started the Parrot project. We were already knee deep in it, and there was also a desire to have this CD completed and allow the community to move forward. So, it was the governor's office call, the trustee and stuff, and we implement things. But I think there was probably good rationale. We really thought there was a very low chance of some of the things that were brought up as concerns with the project. But we needed data to show that.
Right.
You couldn't just say that, like, well, it's my opinion. We needed data to show that what we thought.
Thanks.
Mike Paffhausen from Butte. For the purpose of the funds that came from here to help pay for this project, in future years, would you guys be willing to provide some very simple graphs or efficacy data showing, copper and zinc concentrations, for example, going down in surface waters or in monitoring wells, just so that we can see that data in the future when it becomes available, because the project is completed.
Oh, yeah. We actually have whole presentations we've given on it to the BNRC. We'd be happy to come over here, have the team members come over here and go through it. We can go through as much or as little as you want, but we can do it at a fairly reasonable level to show you looking at effectiveness, right?
Yeah.
That's the real, we spent $30 million on it. What difference did it make? Because there were people out there critical saying that it wouldn't make any difference. And so I think, like all our projects where we can show effectiveness, it's good. And so, yeah, when we do our next review, and I think we're about time to start looking at the data, it takes us 3-4 months to analyze it, come up with like a tech memo. But we'd be more than happy to come over here and give a presentation.
Perfect. Thank you.
This is Doug. I guess if it would, please the council, we could just, I'm looking at the clock. It's been less than 2 hours and we've gotten through it. We could add that type of thing to the annual, in our annual report instead of Jim could talk about those results next year at the same time. So we could actually just work that into this annual report. So
I think that would be very wise.
yeah.
Agreed. Krista Beal, agreed. Nick.
Mick Ringside Butte. I don't have a question for you at all. I just want to comment for the rest of the council that hasn't been into this as far as you have and other things, but in the criteria of the consent decree, it was agreed to by BP, the state and Silverbow at a certain level. And when they cleaned up Missoula, the final result of the soil on site was 483 milligrams per kilogram, or 43 parts per million. When they finished this, it was 1,320 parts per million. It's the cleanest area from Butte all the way down to Missoula. But in the consent decree, there are 5 metals: zinc, copper, lead, cadmium, and
Arsenic.
mercury. And then there's a semi-metal arsenic. And the criteria in there allows for 11,500 parts per million. And the people in Butte have been fighting on this. And ARCO and BP, and to a degree, the county have been in agreement with it. And the only bulwark that has stopped that from happening has been the NRDP and these folks that are here. And they have done an amazing job, and you all should know that. And they're trying to prevent what happened in Stone Arrow Park here in town, where after they built the park that was good forever, in 20 years, it's definitely got signs out there saying kids can't use it because of the arsenic. And so all of these people deserve an attaboy from not only our community, but from the board and the NRDP. As far as I'm concerned, anything this board or they want to do, I'm going to be for, because they have been just fighting. And I think they've succeeded in bringing ARCO and BP back to the table so we can get it. So what it is, the Parrot Tailings, we can get 1320 all the way through the corridors for the Butte. It would be an amazing achievement. You need to know that they've been working on that and they're responsible for it.
Yeah, and as Steve Hill, man, I don't dispute the success. I think there's plenty of successes around here. People recognize it more. I guess my question is, on a site like this, of this magnitude, that there are always surprises. In the future, there will always be things that pop up that come, God, I wish we knew, and would have known that. So transferring the liability to a third party that had no responsibility for creating the mess is my question. That's all. And you get ARCO, Silverbow, and the state all relying on one another, and the state ends up with the liability. To me, that's a question.
Yeah, DEQ has been really supportive of the NRDP in this situation. So, but BP's got that barrel of lawyers, pardon me, and engineers that they're paying $2,000 an hour for, talking to our planning director. You know, it's not a fair battle.
Christy Beal, that's not what all lawyers make, trust me.
You know,
Anyway, I think it's an interesting project, fascinating project. I'm pretty familiar with ET covers and they're a great option.
Yeah, we hope, and we hope with the data and our costing information and stuff, there'll be more, more, employed and viewed, for similar situations where infiltration is a problem and where you have maybe some more active land use. Yeah.
One other question, Mike Packhausen from you. You mentioned that Butte Silver Bowl will have 2 parcels of land that they will have kind of a decision to make of its in land use. If you could go back to the slide and to kind of point out what parcels exactly.
Yeah, so that's they call these developmental parcels. Now, the end land use, this is Butte Silver Bow's land, so the zoning and all that, that's their decision. We're not involved with that, right? What they end up doing with this, if they make it a park or if they build a hotel or whatever, we have nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
But what we can say is because of what we used for fill and other such, that this is all unencumbered. So you should be able to do whatever you need to or want to do with this land, whether it's, like I say, a hotel or a park or anything else.
Who profits? Does that money come back to this fund or does Butte Silver Bowl retain that money?
It's sort of complicated in our agreement with them. They would owe us $250,000. We put in some money for Copper Mountain for the baseball field there, because there used to be a baseball field here.
Yep.
And the first $250,000 that comes out of whatever these parcels might generate would come back to us.
Okay.
And I don't know specifically which count that was. That was a deal we made, 3 or 4 years before the CD was final.
So they have the right to sell and lease and whatever,
Yeah.
whatever normal.
That's right. It's their.
That's fully remediated land. That, right. There's no waste in place down there.
That's right. You could infiltrate water. I wouldn't want you to infiltrate water, but if you had to get rid of stormwater, like most people get rid of stormwater by trying to infiltrate it, you could do it here. Now the subdrain starts right over here, flows downhill. That might be issues with BP, but it wouldn't be an issue with us or this property.
So this is Mike, to follow up on your question there, and that was a good question, and just to let folks know is that This was a groundwater and surface water restoration project or waste removal project. And, you know, so, you know, what's left there, if UCFRB does do something that wasn't a terrestrial restoration project or a landscape restoration. It was trying to get to the groundwater, which is ultimately getting to Silver Creek, so.
Yeah, I think my point is that if Butte Silver Bow now has a new land use and creates value in the land, how could that not be construed as money that needs to be returned back to this fund? Has that been discussed and thoroughly vetted? Because that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Butte, I mean, I'm a Butte Silver Bow person, right? So I'm fine with them getting this, but for the sake of this fund and wearing this hat, that doesn't necessarily seem correct. Like if there's a lease that we should be receiving a portion of said lease because we created the value from this fund.
Yeah, that was not part of the deal. You know, there's a lot of projects that we work on that, you know, are a cost to the program or a cost to the fund, I should say. But there's the resource benefit, you know, so that's what we go back to is what is the resource benefit? And the resource benefit here was getting the most highly contaminated material, you know, that's affecting that alluvial aquifer, that groundwater aquifer there out of there. So that's the benefit that we were looking at for this project.
Yeah, Mike, it's a good point. I mean, that consideration is not much different than say when you clean up parts of the Clark Fork River that are on private property, right? You're adding value there, you're removing the waste that's, you know, the property stays in private hands and
yeah,
it's a hard thing in our business to sort of judge here. We didn't take that into account when we made this agreement. There's just $250,000 that comes back to us when and if they do something, if they develop these parcels. But that was related primarily to the ball field and what we put up. But it's a fair point, you know, how do you balance those needs? Because again, just like Doug said, this was all about that blue-green groundwater, right? And if it wasn't for that groundwater, if it was just waste in place, we probably wouldn't have done it. It was the groundwater effects on the streams that was our biggest consideration.
and the only thing that I'd bring up is this is the only project where the return of any unspent money was to be brought back to said fund. And there could be an argument that the new value of land could be construed as part of that unspent money that could be returned to fund. So I just think that it's worth us thoroughly considering, because at some point the public or some others could scrutinize that Butte Silver Bow profiteered unjustly in the project and retained an asset that they made money from, and when that money should have been construed as returned to this council for other restoration. And I'm from Butte Silver Bowl, so I'm biased to always having money spent in Butte, but others are not going to be that way, and we have to be accountable to all of them in this. So,
no, we've certainly heard about the shops, right? It's $14.4 million, and we had to move those shops to get at this waste. And people look, you know, I've heard it plenty of times that this was a shops project, not a groundwater project. Well,
there was no choice, right? I had to go.
Yeah. You know, and Butte Silver Bow decided where they put them. I mean, you could have put them back on the site, could have flip-flopped sites. That was discussed. Would have been a little lower cost and stuff, but you know, we worked with Butte Silver Bow to find what worked best for them.
I'm going to interrupt here to keep us on schedule. Any additional questions from anyone electronically? Thank you, Jim.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
So this is Doug Martin. I'm going to conclude the presentation here with a summary of the aquatic and terrestrial the revision to the plans. But first, I would like to recognize the NRDP staff. Yeah, Jim talked about the large project and the Parrot that he completed. Nathan and Ray and Brian talked about projects that they worked on. Miranda talked about the financials. I have developed a list of all of the accomplishments that the program has made in 2023. We didn't get quite as much done in the Upper Clark Fork Basin as we did the previous year. A lot of that was based on other priorities that we've had within the program. One of them was one of the biggest ones we had was the revision to the restoration plan. And as you guys know, that was a pretty big lift for us. But we are getting to the end of that. So I would like to recognize all the staff, and I'm sorry, Julie. And thank you for having that. But we've worked on, just to let you guys know, we've worked on a settlement. We got a settlement up in Libby, associated with the Superfund site at the asbestos mine up there, where we're now developing a restoration plan for that. Nathan was just out in Glendive last Wednesday, working on the restoration plan that we settled there previously, and working with Walleye Unlimited out there about, helping with the fishing access site. So we have accomplished a lot that you guys don't see. So it is it's been a busy 2023 for it, but a good one. But in general, where we are with the revision, as you know, we had a long meeting in October. Grateful for all you guys sticking with that and pushing us through that. On December 14th, we will meet with the Trustee Restoration Council, and Christie will be there representing the AC. We will present your motions, our recommendations to the governor, and the other trustees at that meeting, where they will consider the revisions that have been proposed and the modifications that you guys had recommended. And then hopefully by the end of the year, we will get that plan to the governor for his signature. So the hope is in 2024, we will be implementing a revised restoration plan with the revisions that we've talked about over the course of 2023. So that's the plan. So that meeting is at DQ at 1 o'clock. Yes, it starts at 1 o'clock on the 14th. If anybody is interested, and it will be a virtual meeting as well, so you'll be able to join. So if anybody has any questions about the revision, otherwise, we can move on and finish her.
Novel.
Giving you 4 minutes back in your life from 4 hours last October. Any questions, comments from anyone? Additional questions, comments? I want to also thank all the council for the hard work in October. Just as Doug commented, it was a heavy lift and wasn't without a little pain for everyone. So thank you to everyone for that hard work. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Great.
Thank you again.
Thank you. I'm sure. Well, it's, I mean, no, I'm sure it's pretty hard, so it's probably associated with that, but it's